All right, man, peace. So the Philadelphia 76ers have become the new quote-unquote sexy team in the NBA playoffs. Many people are now predicting them to represent the Eastern Conference in the NBA Finals. Well, they got off to a very poor start if they're fated to end up in the finals because they lost Game 1 to their Eastern Conference semifinal foe, the Boston Celtics, who seem to be the most well-coached team in the NBA by Mr. Brad Stevens. So anyway, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
All right, guys, let's get into it. The theme of the Celtics season has been man down, with the latest injury being Jaylen Brown. But last night it looked more like man up. Jason Tatum, Al Horford, Terry Rozier all had at least 25 points, carrying the C's to victory at home, taking a 1-0 lead over a fully loaded Philly team. So
let me say this. When you have a team like the Boston Celtics, who have players that are able to replace proven starters, and they're able to produce on that level, where you have 2 to 3 players scoring 20 to 25 points and then another player scoring 15 to 18 points. That's because their offensive spacing is so good that they all believe that they're going to have a viable opportunity to score whenever they touch the basketball. When you see these teams where one player has 45 points and the next highest scorer has 10 points, it's because when these other players get the basketball, they already know that they're not supposed to shoot. They're supposed to get it back to that main player, whether it be a Russell Westbrook or LeBron James. That's why you see the scoring disparity on many of these other teams, while on the Boston Celtics, you'll see 3 or 4 guys score 20 points because they have the confidence from their coach that if they're open, make a move and make the shot. So all this is coaching.
So, Max, what's the biggest reason for Philly's loss?
I think that they were reading too many of their press clippings. I think that they were running through the streets of Philadelphia, celebrating Meek Mill getting quote-unquote released from prison and banging out all these Philadelphia thotties out there for a week. That's a major issue, especially for a young team. They don't know how to rest in between playoff matchups. And it showed in Game 1. They were not focused. And I think that they're taking themselves a little bit too seriously. I think that they're breathing in too many of their own fumes.
The biggest reason, and there were several, but the biggest one, they just hadn't played in a while. That's it. They were out of rhythm. To rhythm.
Well, Game 2 is going to be a referendum on that, Max Kellerman. Game 2 is going to determine this series. And when I say that, I don't think that Philadelphia necessarily needs to win Game 2, but they have to have a much better showing than Game 1.
Rhythm game, all sports, you need to be in sync, and they were not. And you could see, you could see the defensive effort wasn't exactly there. They lacked certain energy. Okay, I get it and all that. And you give credit to the Celtics, but you could see before, as the shot went up, you could see it wasn't good, and you could see it even almost before it left the player's hand. Even when they had some wide open looks, actually, even when they weren't contested, they just did the way whoever it was.
Embiid has a very good three-point stroke, but he takes too many three-pointers. And it looks glaringly bad when he's that big and he's missing threes. It's always going to look like your big man is taking too many threes whenever he misses one. Because from a conventional offensive perspective, especially with someone with as good a low post game as he has, you would think that he'd be posting up more.
Who was shooting it got the ball. The kind of rhythm they were in, you could see the shots weren't going to go down. Just the way it is. They had a little too much time.
He was missing so much and so grossly that it was very obvious that he had not been doing his due diligence in his off time. He has not been getting up the appropriate amount of warm-up shots because it wasn't even like he was on the hole. Those were complete bricks.
Time off. And if that sounds a little precious, hey, there's some schedule losses, usually during the regular season, second of back-to-back on the road, the third of 4 nights, stuff like that. There can also be schedule losses also in the playoffs with too much time off for a team that just gets rusty sitting around while the other team is competitive and going and in sync. I do not expect a repeat performance like that from the Sixers because now they've played and they'll have shaken some rust off.
They better not get a repeat performance like that, or Boston will get them out of there. Boston can get them out of there in 5 or 6 games if Philadelphia is going to come out fucking around. They're going to have to focus. As of right now, my pick is Philadelphia in 7 games, but we'll see.
Well, to me, everything that you say may be valid points, but that doesn't make it any less acceptable. It was an unacceptable performance. Let's give the Boston Celtics credit where credit is due. This is a team that ranks third defensively in the entire NBA and number one in defending the three-point shot.
Absolutely. You finally did your research, Stephen A. Smith. Good job, sir.
What did they do? They basically held the Sixers for 5 for 26 shooting from three-point range. They turned them into two-point scorers because they kept chasing them off the three-point line. Covington, Saric, and Ilyasova combined for 0 of 10 shooting from three-point range. They did nothing from three-point range last night. And if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, your success was predicated on the three-point shooting ability that you displayed against Miami.
Ben Simmons looked very disengaged. His handle was not sharp. His decision-making was not good. He had an exorbitant amount of turnovers, way too many turnovers than what you would normally expect from someone who's been playing at the level that he's been playing at.
Miami, where you hit about 57 three-pointers in that series. Suddenly, you could barely buy one last night. That was problem number one. Problem number two was effort. It could have been because of rust or whatever, but they just did not look like themselves. And it wasn't just because they were missing shots. It was because they looked like a team forced to do things that they didn't want to do.
I want to see how the coach for the Philadelphia 76ers adjusts to what he saw in Game 1. Because even though the Boston Celtics won the game, Brad Stevens is going to adjust even further to a lot of the defensive schemes that Philadelphia had for his team in Game 1.
Sometimes that happens, but here's where it becomes incredibly alarming. That has nothing to do with what you're able to do on the defensive side of the ball. If you see that you don't have it offensively, if you see that the Boston Celtics are making you do the kind of things that you're not accustomed to doing or that you don't want to do, you know, you can make amends for that by returning the favor, reciprocating and forcing them to do what you didn't want them to do. There's no Kyrie Irving, there's no Gordon Hayward, and on top of it all,
Well, that's the problem. A lot of the members of the Boston Celtics are relatively unproven commodities. So yes, we could say there's no Kyrie Irving, there's no Gordon Hayward, but we're not quite sure what many of these young brothers on Boston are capable of. We don't know how good Terry Rozier is going to be. He may go to the Phoenix Suns next year and become a flameout. Or he could go somewhere and become an all-star. We don't know. We don't know what he's capable of. We're not quite sure what the ceiling is on Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown quite yet. They may become better players than Gordon Hayward ever was.
Jaylen Brown couldn't even play last night, knowing that they were handicapped. For you to go out there and stink up the joint defensively, where Terry Rozier looks like the second coming of Kyrie, where Al Horford, like I told you yesterday, is making shots from all over the place, which is a problem for Philadelphia. They're going to have to figure that out. Of course, and Jason Tatum, you know, looking like a rookie of the year, dude. This brother looked absolutely sensational last night. It is an inexcusable performance by the Philadelphia 76ers because no matter how rusty you were, that explains your offense. It doesn't explain the indifference or the lack of effort, whatever the case, whatever word you want to use, that they displayed defensively. It was an inexcusable performance.
Well, you went to several reasons. The question was the biggest. I said the biggest was rust. But if you want to go to others, the other biggest reason is Danny Ainge and that team he put together in Boston. The depth of that.
The biggest reason is Brad Stevens, dude. That's the biggest reason. That guy, Brad Stevens, he equalizes a lot of the deficiencies that Boston may have in regards to their roster compared to their opponent's roster. Because he knows how to maximize his commodities. He knows how to maximize what he has going for him. He's not going to take a good player and have a scheme that's going to make him look average. He's going to take an average player and create a scheme that makes him look good. That's what a great coach can do for you. That's the difference between a Brad Stevens and Troutmouth over there in New Orleans, or Dwayne Casey and what he's doing in Toronto. And I'll give Dwayne Casey a little bit more leeway because he does not have any A-class stars on his team. Troutmouth actually does. Troutmouth has Anthony Davis. Drew Holiday, in my view, is more skilled and a better player than Kyle Lowry and maybe even DeMar DeRozan. And, of course, Rajon Rondo is going to be a borderline Hall of Famer.
Of that team, the coach that he's installed, Brad Stevens, maybe the best coach in basketball right now. The fact that with 3 of your best 4 players not there, they still perform that way. I mentioned Al Horford yesterday as the key player, obviously at this point, for the Celtics, both ends of the floor. He certainly played that way. Rozier was excellent, and even Tatum. It's interesting because here you have the Sixers and the Celtics. And Tatum was basically traded for Markelle Fultz, the one pick for the 3, and Danny Ainge picked up another first rounder. And what happens? The number 1 pick in the draft doesn't get in the game for the Sixers, and Jason Tatum, the number 3 pick in the draft, drops 28 points in a home win game 1 in the second round of the playoffs. Plus Ainge is going to get another first rounder next year. So look, when it comes to brain power in the East, as I've mentioned, it's Ainge and Ujiri, and Colangelo's actually done a good job with what Hinkie handed him. But in terms of like organization, it's a little bit of a mismatch. Maybe the Celtics against anyone.
One of these Philadelphia 76er fans got upset with me because I stated that Philadelphia turned the corner when Colangelo became involved and they got rid of Hinkie. I think that a lot of people don't understand that what Sam Hinkie did is, as Stephen A. Smith asserted, something that a so-called black general manager would never have been able to get away with. But beyond that, yes, he was able to accrue prime-time real estate, prime-time assets. There's no doubt about that. But would he have been able to turn that team into a winning team? He seemed like he was more concerned with making most of those prime-time assets sit on the bench, almost like someone who's hoarding gold and does not want to spend it or invest it. And every once in a while, just like you have a coach who can make a team good, but you have to get rid of him and bring on a coach that actually wants to take your team to a championship level. It's the same thing with your executives. Certain executives, they just want to draft prospects and assets and have them sit on the bench or sit on the sidelines forever and allegedly gather all types of value, but never want to put them out there on the court or on the field. So it was time for Sam Hinkie to go. And the NBA knew that they had to step in for the Philadelphia 76ers because they saw where this project was going. It was going nowhere fast.
Anyone, Stephen A., because even the Raptors are not able to attract the kind of talent that the Celtics are able to attract. And so, number 1, I'd say it's the Sixers' rust. Number 2, it's an excellently designed and coached Celtics team.
Well, listen, you don't get to sit up there and make that point this morning. You picked the Sixers to win this series just like I did. Everything that you just stated, we knew coming into game 1. But you...
Yes, but he did not say that he thought that the Celtics were going to get swept. So, of course, if the Celtics win games, it's going to be because of certain reasons, Stephen A. Smith.
But you still pick the Sixers. So the bottom line is this. We know all of that about the Boston Celtics. We know all of that about Danny Ainge. We know all of that about the future. But at the end of the day, knowing the personnel that they were having available to them last night, knowing that Jaylen Brown wasn't going to be on the court, there is no excuse for the Sixers. I don't give a damn what Danny Ainge has done. We knew that before this series. We knew that before these playoffs. We knew that coming into the season, the job that Danny Ainge had done with this Boston Celtics team. We didn't know that?
It's one thing to know that he has an excellent system in place with a coach and players, etc. It's another thing to see a guy like Rozier, who we all know is good, but to do what he did last night. Is that partly the Sixers' lackadaisical effort on defense sometimes? Absolutely. Yeah, but what? Rozier, right. But he continuing to do this time against a better coached team and a better team than the Bucks. And the point is, when you can continually just plug and play, Marcus Smart was excellent. We know they're good, yes, Stephen A., but did we know that they were this good and this well coached? This is yet another piece of evidence. And it exploited the fact that the Sixers were rusty. Not any team were just going to beat a rusty Sixers.
I agree with that, Max Kelman. That's a very good point. Due to the level of preparedness that Brad Stevens had his team in for Game 1, it was able to exploit the Sixers' lackadaisical play and their poor approach to Game 1. I think that they thought that they were just going to roll the basketball out there and the Celtics were going to fall down in front of them because of what the media had been saying about the Sixers over the last week or so. No, they're going to have to understand that every round in the playoffs, you have to ratchet up your level of focus and intensity or you will lose.
This team did it.
Well, first of all, we did know this because we saw what they did against a Milwaukee team that's incredibly athletic and formidable defensively because of their length and size. That's number 1. Number 2, we knew that and still picked the Sixers. And the reason why we picked the Sixers, it wasn't just about the fact that, again, they have talent. It's because of Boston being undermanned. We know Rozier could play. We know Marcus Smart could play. We know Al Horford could play. I talked yesterday about how Horford could pull you away from the basket, and that was going to be problematic for Embiid or any anybody who was guarding him because he could make perimeter shots. We get all of that. But in the end, what it comes down to is that no matter what kind of trouble they cause you defensively, offensively, there is no excuse for them to look the way that they look. That is an indictment against the 76ers defense.
I agree. It's also an indictment against the coaching staff. They look extremely unprepared. You could tell by how players miss jump shots, how attuned they are to the task at hand, how focused they are or are not. Even LeBron James stated after he shot 12 for 30 in last night's win in Toronto that the reason why he shot so poorly was because he was unable to get his jump shots up the last couple of days. So that tells me that Joel Embiid and many of the other members of the Sixers, they were not doing their due diligence in between series.
They did not show up last night. They just didn't.
I agree about the defense. The defense was an issue of effort. Maybe they were feeling a little, fat and satisfied because they had been so excellent for so long, although...
That's exactly what it was, even though I would call it more like entitled. Because I think that they've been reading so many of their press clippings that they truly believe that their fate, their destiny is to end up in the NBA Finals this year. And there's a long way to that. And the LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers that they're going to potentially see in the Eastern Conference Finals is going to be a whole different animal from what they saw in the regular season.
Although, as I've mentioned, usually not against excellent competition. This is a step up for the Sixers. So I agree about the defensive effort, but offensively, Stephen A., even when they weren't getting chased off the line, later in the game where it looked where they got, so their offense found some open shots. They were missing them in a way that you could tell they're just out of sync. Even when they were wide open, you knew that's not going in. Even almost before he shot it, that's not going in. The ball wasn't delivered on a guy's steps, on time, in a position that was... Everything was just a little bit off.
Yeah, their rhythm and their cadence was definitely off kilter.
That's rust, man. That happens. Whether or not that's an excuse, it's an explanation. A team sits for 6 days, the other one is active. Yeah, that's what happens.
And that's why you usually know that's going to happen, which is why you got to amp things up defensively, which they didn't do, and it also didn't help that Ben Simmons had more turnovers than field goals. He had 7 turnovers and 6 field goals for the day.
Yeah, he was not good at all. But that's probably because he had 7 turnovers and 6 field goals and probably had 10 thotties over the last week or so.
That's just unacceptable. You just that something like that simply cannot happen against a Boston Celtics team. Clearly, Brad Stevens is the best young coach in basketball, one of the best coaches in basketball.
No, he's the best coach in basketball right now, Stephen A. Smith. He doesn't have Kevin Durant and Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. And Steve Kerr is a great coach. It's obvious by how they play. But when I see a team in the Boston Celtics who don't have anywhere near the name recognition in regards to their roster playing on that level. Now, Brad Stevens is the best coach in the league right now. I would even take him over Popovich because I think that Popovich is starting to lose the stranglehold that he had over many of his more prominent players.
Well, clearly, we're going to be talking about the Boston Celtics the way that we've talked about the Spurs for the last decade plus. We get all of that. But in the end, if you don't have Kyrie and you don't have Jaylen Brown, you can't come in there and let Boston's offense look like that. That's the point. And Russ, listen, when you're playing the game of basketball, if you are rusty, that's why defense matters so much, because rust really affects defense. It affects you offensively, but you make up for it on the defensive end of the floor because of your level of tenacity.
I agree.
You've got to go after it. You've got to make sure you're willing to shut them down. Philly did not do that last night.
Once again, Brett Brown is going to have to step his game up. I don't expect him to coach on the level of a Brad Stevens, but he cannot get completely outcoached, or it is going to show. It's going to show. It's going to reflect on him if the 76ers bow out in this series in 5 or 6 games. They're going to have to show a very, very drastic uptick in activity, proficiency, and game plan for Game 2, or Brett Brown is going to enter into the eye of the storm in regards to scrutiny.
Max, last word here.
You hear what Embiid said after the game, though? Of course. You hear what Embiid said after the game, though. Embiid, this is why Sixers fans can maybe not rest easy, but be confident. because your best player and one of your two franchise cornerstones, Embiid, takes responsibility after the game, says rust isn't an excuse, they have to be ready, points to himself first as the defense, as the anchor on defense, say he failed to deliver, Sixers are going to be all right.
Yeah, he said all the right things. The Sixers shot under 20% from three-point range, snapped their 11-game winning streak with Embiid in games that...
And that's huge for them, but they have to be very careful not to become overly three-point dependent as a team. But anyway, that's it on the Boston Celtics and Philadelphia 76ers series game 1. Game 2 will be pivotal in regards to the Philadelphia 76ers and the effort that they bring to the table. Peace.